The gray wolf caught a fox stealing food from his pack, but what he did after that melted hearts worldwide. The gray wolf's jaws closed around the red fox's throat, not to crush but to hold. The smaller animal hung suspended between life and death, amber eyes wide, body gone rigid in the ancient stillness of prey. Around them, 6 wolves circled through falling snow, their breath forming clouds in the crystalline air of the Yellowstone backcountry. The stolen elk haunch lay abandoned in crimson-stained snow. Every wolf in the Lamar Canyon pack had seen the theft. Every wolf had the right to kill. But the alpha's mouth remained gentle, holding without breaking skin. And in that impossibly soft grip, something passed between predator and trespasser that neither species had words for. Only the wolf's low rumble and the fox's racing heartbeat, drumming against inevitable death that somehow, impossibly, did not come. Wait, before the next revelation happens. If this bond between these creatures has already touched you, tell us where you're watching from. To witness every act of courage, every impossible friendship, and every silent miracle of nature, subscribe and join our circle. The next moment will change everything. Now, back to the wild. The alpha released his hold. The fox dropped into snow that had witnessed 1,000 kills, her russet body crumpling like autumn leaves. She did not run. Perhaps she understood that running from wolves meant death by pursuit, by the pack's terrible coordination, by jaws designed to bring down animals 10 times her size. Or perhaps something in the alpha's pale yellow eyes had communicated what his gentle mouth had already whispered. Not today. Not you. The wolf stepped back. His pack, a breeding female, 2 yearlings, and 3 younger siblings, maintained their circle but made no move to attack. Their eyes shifted between their leader and the fox, reading a language written in stance and breath, in the angle of ears and the tension of shoulders. The alpha's tail hung neutral, his head remained level. In wolf speech, he was saying, "Wait, watch. This is not what it seems." The fox's name, if such a solitary creature could be said to have one in the human sense, was Survival. She had been surviving for 28 months in territories claimed by wolves, bears, coyotes, and mountain lions. Her survival was written in scars hidden beneath her winter coat, the bear claw that had grazed her hip in a berry dispute, the eagle talon marks from a rabbit shed refused to abandon, the white patch on her shoulder where infection had stolen her fur after a coyote bite. She was small, even for a red fox, barely 12 pounds in her winter prime, living in a world built for creatures 3 and 4 times her mass. She had watched the Lamar Canyon pack make their kill from a ridge a quarter-mile distant. The elk had been old, arthritic, separating from her herd at the worst possible moment in the worst possible terrain. The wolves had worked with the efficiency of 1,000 generations of pack hunters, 2 cutting her off from escape routes, 2 driving her toward a boulder field where her failing joints would betray her, the alpha and his mate delivering the final merciful strikes. The kill had taken 7 minutes. The dying had taken 2 more. The fox had waited an hour after the pack began feeding, watching them tear into the carcass with the methodical hunger of predators who never knew when the next meal would come. She had waited until the yearlings wandered to a nearby stream to drink, until the younger wolves settled into a food coma, until the alpha and his mate moved upwind to scan the territory for threats. Grizzlies roused early from hibernation, a rival pack encroaching on boundaries marked in scent and violence, or humans with their rifles and their unpredictable capacity for both protection and destruction. In that moment of inattention, the fox had made her move. It had been a calculation born of desperation. 3 days without a substantial meal, the mice and voles frozen beneath snow that had fallen heavy and early, the rabbits grown wary and fast. The carcasses of winter-killed deer and elk claimed by ravens who called in the wolves, the bears, the eagles, everyone but her. She had been surviving on frozen berries and the viscera of kills too old for even the flies to want, and her body had begun consuming itself. She had felt it in the way her hip bones protruded sharper each morning, in the weakness that made jumping half as high, running half as far. The elk haunch had still been warm. She had seized it in jaws designed for mice and meadow voles, dragging meat meant for wolves, and in her hunger she had forgotten the most basic rule of her existence: never challenge those who hunt in packs. The yearling had spotted her first, a flash of red against white, movement where only stillness should be. His bark had brought the alpha at a sprint that covered 50 yards in seconds, a gray avalanche of muscle and predatory grace. The fox had dropped the haunch and run, knowing it was futile, knowing her 12-pound body could never outpace the wolf's 80 pounds of evolved pursuit predation. She had expected the bite. She had expected her neck to break in those jaws that crush elk vertebrae. She had not expected gentleness. Now, crouched in snow beneath a circle of wolves, she made a choice that defied every instinct her species had refined over millennia. She did not run. She lowered her head in a gesture that was not submission exactly, but acknowledgement. Her amber eyes met the alpha's pale yellow stare, and in that gaze passed something that wildlife biologists would spend careers trying to explain and failing, something that existed in the space between species where empathy and strategy became indistinguishable. The alpha male had been born 4 years prior in this same valley, the largest pup in a litter of 6. He had learned to hunt by watching his parents coordinate attacks with a precision that seemed almost telepathic. The subtle shift in his father's shoulders that signaled the cutoff maneuver, his mother's barely perceptible head turn that indicated which yearling should hang back as insurance against escape. He had learned that strength meant nothing without strategy, that jaws meant nothing without judgment. He had also learned mercy, though that word did not exist in his vocabulary of scent and posture, sound and touch. He had learned it the previous spring when his pack had cornered a cow elk with a calf. The mother had been easy prey, weakened by birth, slowed by protection instinct. But the calf had been too young to survive alone, and something in his mother's eyes had communicated a boundary even hunger could not cross. They had let both animals go. 3 wolves had gone hungry that night, but the pack had remained a pack, bound by rules deeper than appetite. Now, looking at this fox who had stolen from them but also shown the courage of desperation, the alpha recognized something. Perhaps it was the way her eyes held his without the wild panic of defeated prey. Perhaps it was the scars he could see now beneath her fur, the story of survival written on her small body. Perhaps it was simply that in this moment, with his belly still full from the elk kill, mercy cost him nothing. He turned away from her. It was a statement. The breeding female understood first. She stepped back from the circle, creating an opening. The yearlings followed, reading their parents with the fluency of those who had spent every day of their lives learning this silent language. The younger wolves, confused but obedient, backed away. The circle opened. A path through the wolves appeared, leading to the forest edge where pines stood dark against evening sky. The fox did not move. For 10 seconds that stretched like winter itself, she remained frozen, waiting for the trap she was certain must exist. Wolves did not spare foxes. Wolves killed foxes, for territory, for food, sometimes simply for the ancient enmity between competing predators. The world she knew had no space for this opening, this gift of passage. The alpha took another step back, then another. His pack mirrored his movements, widening the gap until 10 feet of blood-stained snow lay between the fox and freedom. She rose on legs that trembled. She took one step, paused, took another. Her eyes remained on the alpha, reading him for the change that would bring death. But he simply watched, his expression unreadable in the way of wolves whose faces showed everything and nothing. She walked through the pack. Each step expected jaws. Each breath expected to be her last. But the wolves stood like sentinels, witnessing her passage without interfering. When she reached the edge of their circle, she broke into a run, her small body disappearing into the pines with the speed of profound terror finally released. The pack returned to their kill. They fed until nothing remained but bones the ravens would fight over, until the snow around the carcass site looked like a crime scene painted in crimson and gray. And then they moved on, following territory boundaries, remarking their claims, being wolves in all the ways wolves had been for thousands of years. But the alpha paused at the tree line where the fox had vanished. He stood there in falling snow, reading scents layered in wind, pine resin and fear sweat, fox musk and old blood. He read them the way wolves read stories, understanding in scent what humans needed words to express. The fox had been starving. The fox had been desperate. The fox had shown courage in the face of certain death, and something in that courage had earned what mercy he could afford to give. He marked the tree where she had passed, lifting his leg in the universal declaration of presence. But his scent mark carried something beyond simple territory claim. It carried information his pack would read and understand. The red fox who stole from us has been judged. She has been spared. Should we encounter her again, remember this choice. He could not know, in that moment of snow and silence and scent, that this encounter was not an ending, but an opening. The first chapter of a story that would unfold across the brutal mathematics of a Yellowstone winter. The fox ran until her lungs burned and her legs could carry her no farther. She collapsed in a hollow beneath a fallen pine, her body shaking not just from exertion, but from the aftermath of adrenaline, from the profound confusion of being prey who had walked away from predators. In her small brain, shaped by natural selection for wariness and survival, she tried to process what had happened. Wolves killed. It was not cruelty, it was simply what wolves did. They killed elk and deer and bison. They killed coyotes who competed for prey. They killed foxes who entered their territory. These were the rules by which the wild operated, rules written in blood and hunger, rules that kept populations in balance and ecosystems functioning. But the alpha had not killed her. He had held her in jaws that could have crushed her windpipe, and then he had released her. He had opened his pack circle and allowed her to walk through, unmolested, into the forest. In the fox's experience, gifts always came with costs. The easy rabbit in the trap, the unguarded den that smelled of bear, the carcass that brought ravens who brought wolves. She waited in her hollow for the cost to reveal itself, for the pursuit to resume, for death to arrive in whatever form it chose. But the forest remained quiet, except for the wind in pines and the distant call of a great horned owl claiming hunting territory. No wolves came, no death arrived. As darkness fell and cold deepened, the fox's survival instinct reasserted itself. She had burned calories she could not afford to lose in her escape. She needed food, shelter, rest. The questions of why and how could wait. Right now, she needed to survive this night so she could face the next. She emerged from her hollow and began to hunt, her nose reading the snow for the tunnels of mice and voles, her ears tuned to the tiny sounds of prey moving beneath winter's white blanket. She caught 2 mice in an hour, barely enough to sustain her, but better than nothing. Then she found a rocky outcropping with a small cave at its base, too small for bears or wolves, just large enough for her body. She curled tight inside, her thick winter tail wrapped around her nose to preserve heat. Outside, the temperature dropped to 15 below zero. Inside her shelter, she maintained the bare minimum warmth needed to survive until dawn. As she drifted into the half-sleep of animals who must remain vigilant even at rest, her mind returned again and again to the moment when the alpha wolf's jaws had held her throat with a gentleness that defied everything she knew about the world. She did not have language for what she felt. But if she had, it might have been something like confusion or curiosity, or perhaps the faintest beginning of something that, in humans, might be called trust. 2 miles away, the Lamar Canyon Pack settled into their own rest, a pile of wolves sharing warmth against the winter night. They slept with the easy security of apex predators, of those who knew their strength and their place in the hierarchy of survival. But the alpha's sleep was lighter than usual. Some part of him remained alert, listening to the forest, tracking the wind patterns, monitoring the small sounds that could mean threat or prey, or simply the world going about its business of being wild. And when he dreamed, if wolves could be said to dream in the narrative sense humans understood, perhaps he dreamed of a small red shape moving through falling snow, of amber eyes that had met his with something other than the emptiness of prey accepting death, of a choice made in a moment that could have gone either way. In the morning, both wolf and fox woke to a world transformed by fresh snowfall. 8 inches had fallen during the night, covering tracks, erasing scent marks, providing both challenge and opportunity. The fox would have to hunt harder to find prey beneath deeper snow. The wolves would have easier tracking of elk and deer who struggled in the powder. This was winter in Yellowstone, where every day was a negotiation between survival and surrender, where the strong thrived and the weak fell, and the lucky sometimes transcended both categories through a combination of cunning and circumstance that looked, from the outside, like a kind of grace. The fox emerged from her shelter and began the daily work of staying alive. The wolves rose and stretched and began their patrol of territory boundaries, remarking, reinforcing, defending the invisible lines that meant everything to pack stability. Their territories overlapped in places. Boundary zones where wolf scent faded and fox scent began, where both species traveled but neither claimed absolute dominion. In these liminal spaces, the fox and the alpha would cross paths again, drawn together by the random movements of predator and prey, by the convergence of survival needs in a landscape that supported both species but guaranteed neither prosperity. But that reunion was still days away, and much would happen in those days to transform the cautious mercy of a moment into something larger, something that would test both creatures in ways they could not anticipate. For now, they were simply what they had always been, a wolf being a wolf, a fox being a fox, in a winter that cared nothing for their individual stories and everything for the brutal logic of natural selection. The fox caught 3 voles by midday, enough to quiet the gnawing emptiness, but not enough to restore the reserves she had burned. She moved through the forest with the hypervigilance of the small and vulnerable, her ears swiveling to track sounds, her nose reading wind for the scent of threats. She smelled wolves twice, once the Lamar Canyon Pack on a morning hunt, once a different pack whose scent was less familiar, edged with the aggressive markers of wolves defending contested territory. Both times she hid, making herself small and still, becoming just another shadow among the pines. But she also noticed something else. The Lamar Canyon Pack's scent was everywhere in this section of forest, their territory markers fresh and frequent. It was a warning to other wolves. This land is claimed. Challenge us at your peril. But for the fox, those markers served a different purpose. Where the Lamar Pack claimed territory, other predators, bears, mountain lions, rival wolf packs, were less likely to encroach. The alpha's dominance created a kind of protection, an umbrella under which smaller creatures could sometimes find safety. The irony was not lost on her. though she processed it as instinct rather than conscious thought. The wolves who had nearly killed her might also be the wolves who kept her alive. Part 2. The Labyrinth of Instinct. The following days established a pattern. The fox hunted in the margins of the Lamar pack's territory, learning their rhythms, their travel routes, their kill sites. She became a shadow creature, present but unseen, taking what they left behind without triggering their territorial response. On the 4th day after their first encounter, she found one of their kills, a young mule deer the pack had taken down at dawn and fed from until satisfied. They had left a quarter of the carcass, more than enough to feed her for 2 days if she could defend it from ravens and other scavengers. She approached cautiously, reading the air for wolf scent, for the possibility that pack members still guarded the kill. But the scent was hours old, fading. The wolves had moved on. She fed, tearing into meat with a desperation born of caloric deficit, of a body that had been eating itself for weeks. The flesh was cold but rich, dense with fat and protein her small frame desperately needed. She ate until her belly distended, until the gnawing emptiness finally, temporarily ceased. As she fed, ravens gathered in the trees above, their calls bringing more ravens, their collective presence announcing to every predator within a mile, "Food here, come claim it." She knew she had minutes at most before something larger arrived. She dragged what she could into the underbrush, covering it with snow and debris, marking it with her own scent in a futile attempt at ownership. Then she retreated to watch, to see what would come. A coyote arrived first, larger than her but smaller than a wolf, with the bold aggression of an opportunist who survived by reading situations and exploiting weakness. He uncovered her cache in seconds, his nose far more sophisticated than her attempt at hiding. The fox watched from 40 yards distant, her body tense with frustration. She had fed, but she had wanted more, had needed the reserves that meat represented. But she was too small to defend against a coyote, too light to win a physical confrontation. The coyote fed, gorging himself, and the fox turned to leave, accepting the loss as part of the arithmetic of being small and alone. Then the coyote's feeding stopped. His head jerked up, ears forward, body frozen in mid-bite. The fox followed his gaze, and her own body went rigid. The alpha wolf stood at the tree line, 50 yards distant. He had appeared as wolves do, silently, a ghost materialized from forest and shadow. His pack was nowhere visible, which meant he was either scouting ahead or they were spread out, surrounding the area in the coordinated pattern that made wolf hunts devastatingly effective. The coyote bolted. He abandoned the kill mid-bite and ran, his survival instinct overriding his hunger. Coyotes who stayed to argue with wolves became dead coyotes. It was a simple equation every canid in Yellowstone understood. The alpha watched the coyote disappear, then turned his attention to the kill site. His gaze swept the area, reading the scene. The deer carcass his pack had left, the fox's attempt to cache meat, the coyote's disturbance. Then his eyes found the fox. She remained absolutely still, every muscle locked, her breath held. 40 yards separated them. She could run, but wolves could cover 40 yards in seconds. She could submit, but submission meant approaching, and approaching meant entering range of those jaws. The alpha's ears were forward, his expression neutral. He looked at her the way wolves looked at things they were deciding about, assessing threat, calculating benefit, weighing options in the complex social mathematics that governed pack life. Then he did something extraordinary. He turned away from her and walked back into the forest, his gray form fading between the pines until he was gone completely, as if he had never been there at all. The message was clear. Feed. This kill is abandoned. You do not threaten us. The fox remained frozen for a full minute after he vanished, waiting for the trap, for the ambush, for the lesson about trust. But no wolves emerged. The forest returned to its baseline quiet. Wind in pines, distant raven calls, the creak of branches heavy with snow. She returned to the cached meat. She fed again, quickly this time, taking what she could carry in her stomach before something else arrived. Then she retreated to her shelter, her body heavy with food, her mind struggling with concepts her species was not designed to process. Twice now, the alpha had spared her. First, when he held her throat in jaws that could have killed. Now, when he could have chased her from a kill site, could have asserted his pack's dominance, could have eliminated a competitor for resources. Instead, he had walked away. In the fox's experience, patterns meant something. The easy hunting in the meadow meant a predator was herding prey into a killing zone. The unguarded den meant a bear was nearby, temporarily absent but soon to return. The too still forest meant mountain lions crouched in branches overhead. But this pattern, the alpha's repeated mercy, fit no framework she understood. It was not courtship. They were different species. It was not pack behavior. She was solitary. It was not typical predator strategy. He gained nothing obvious from sparing her. She spent the afternoon in her shelter, digesting meat, resting, trying to solve a puzzle that had no clear answer. Outside, the winter day shortened toward early darkness. The temperature dropped. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of more snow approaching. As dusk fell, she emerged to hunt, to supplement the deer meat with the mice and voles that made up her typical diet. She had gone perhaps half a mile when she smelled them. Wolves, but not the Lamar pack. This was the other pack whose scent she had detected days before, the ones with the aggressive territorial markers. She froze, reading the air, trying to determine direction and distance. The scent was fresh, very fresh. They were close. Then she heard them. Not howls, but the sound of movement through snow, of multiple large bodies pushing through underbrush. They were coming her direction, probably on a hunt, following prey scent or simply patrolling boundaries. She ran. Not toward her shelter. That was upwind, and they would smell her direction. Instead, she ran perpendicular to their approach, trying to put distance between herself and the pack, trying to reach terrain where her smaller size would be an advantage, rocky areas where wolves struggled, dense underbrush where her 12 pounds could slip through gaps that 80-pound wolves could not. But these wolves were fast and experienced, and they had detected her scent. She heard the change in their movement, the acceleration, the focus, the shift from patrol to pursuit. She was being hunted. The fox ran with every ounce of speed her body possessed, her paws barely touching snow, her breath coming in gasps of vapor. Behind her, the wolves coordinated their pursuit with the precision of pack hunters, spreading out to cut off escape routes, maintaining pressure, driving her toward terrain where they would have the advantage. She understood in that moment the difference between the Lamar pack and these wolves. The alpha had shown mercy, had made choices that defied instinct. These wolves knew no such hesitation. To them, she was simply prey, small, vulnerable, worth killing either for food or to eliminate competition. The terrain turned against her. She was being driven toward a frozen stream, toward open ground where wolves excelled. She tried to cut sideways, to reverse direction, but they had anticipated this, had positioned themselves to eliminate that option. She was going to die. The knowledge came with a clarity that was almost peaceful, the recognition that she had been living on borrowed time since the moment she stole from the alpha's kill, that these few extra days were more than most foxes got. She burst from the tree line onto the frozen stream, her paws scrabbling on ice, and behind her the wolves emerged in a gray wave of predatory intent. Then, from upstream, came a sound that changed everything. The alpha's howl cut through the winter air, not the long, mournful cry of location calls, but the sharp, aggressive challenge howl that meant, "This is our territory. You do not belong here." The pursuing pack stopped. The fox could feel their confusion, their sudden reassessment of the situation. They had been chasing prey in what they thought was neutral territory, or perhaps even their own boundary zone. The alpha's howl announced they were wrong. A second howl joined the first, the breeding female. Then the yearlings, then the full chorus of the Lamar Canyon pack, their voices converging in the territorial declaration that had kept rival packs at bay for generations. The fox ran. She did not stop to question, did not pause to understand. She ran across the ice toward the sound of the wolves who had twice spared her life, because in this moment they represented something that defied all logic: safety. The rival pack howled their own challenge, but it was weaker, less certain. They had been caught encroaching on established territory, and while they might win a confrontation, packs were nearly equal in size. The fight would cost them wolves they could not afford to lose. Better to retreat, to challenge another day when the tactical situation favored them. They melted back into the forest, their howls fading, their presence diminishing to scent and memory. The fox reached the far side of the stream and collapsed in snow, her lungs burning, her legs trembling from exertion and terror. She had run perhaps a mile at full speed, a distance that for her small body was the equivalent of a marathon sprint. The alpha appeared from the trees upstream. Behind him, his pack materialized, the breeding female, the yearlings, the younger wolves, all watching with the focused attention of predators evaluating a situation. The alpha approached the fox. She remained still, too exhausted to run, too confused to know if running would help. She had been saved from one pack of wolves by another pack of wolves, and the mathematics of that salvation made no sense. He stopped 10 feet from where she lay. His pack spread out in the loose formation of wolves who were not attacking but were maintaining tactical options. The breeding female moved to the alpha's right side, her position mirroring his, their partnership visible in the synchronization of their stance. The alpha studied the fox. She met his gaze, her amber eyes reflecting the last light of dusk. In that moment, something was communicated between them that went beyond the simple predator-prey dynamic, beyond the territorial boundaries that governed wolf-fox relations. She was in his territory. She was using his kills. She had been chased by rivals into his domain, and his defense of her, intentional or not, had now created a connection, an acknowledgement that her presence meant something beyond simple tolerance. The breeding female growled softly. It was not a threat to the fox, but a question to her mate. Why are we doing? Why are we protecting this animal who is not pack, not kin, not even the same species? The alpha's response was silence. He simply looked at the fox, then turned and walked back into the forest. His pack followed, their forms dissolving into shadows and trees. The fox was alone again, still collapsed in snow, her body gradually recovering from its sprint to survival. But she was alone in territory the alpha had just defended. She was alive because he had howled, because his pack had answered, because they had driven off rivals in a display of dominance that happened to save her life. Coincidence? Strategy? Some wolf calculation she could not comprehend? She did not know. But as she rose on shaking legs and made her way back to her shelter, she understood that something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer simply a fox surviving in wolf territory. She was a fox whose survival had become entangled with the pack's territorial politics. whose presence the alpha had twice protected, whose continued existence was starting to mean something in the complex social calculus of pack life. The pattern continued. Over the following weeks, the fox found herself gravitating toward the Lamar pack's territory rather than avoiding it. She learned their hunting schedule, their travel routes, their preferred kill sites. She became expert at reading the freshness of their scent marks, at knowing when they had passed through an area and when it was safe to move. She fed from their kills regularly now, not every kill, but enough that she began to regain the weight she had lost, began to rebuild the fat reserves necessary for surviving deep winter. The pack seemed to accept her presence as long as she maintained distance, as long as she took only what they had abandoned. 3 times more she encountered the alpha alone. Once at a stream where both had come to drink. Once in a meadow where he was tracking rabbit scent and she was hunting voles. Once at dusk when she was returning to her shelter and he was leaving a fresh kill. Each time he acknowledged her with a glance and nothing more. No aggression, no invitation. Simply recognition that she existed, that her presence in his territory was noted, and, for reasons she could not fathom, accepted. The breeding female was less tolerant. Twice the fox sensed the female wolf watching her from distances that felt calculating, assessing. Female wolves were the heart of pack cohesion, the ones who decided which alliances were beneficial and which were threats. The alpha might make tactical decisions, but the breeding female ensured the pack's long-term survival. The fox understood she was being evaluated, measured against some standard she could not see or comprehend. She made herself small during these encounters, taking the least possible, disturbing nothing, leaving no trace of disrespect. January deepened into February. The snow measured in feet now rather than inches. Temperatures dropped to 20 and 30 below zero. This was the time of year when the weak died. The old elk, the injured deer, the young of every species who had not built sufficient reserves. This was natural selection at its most brutal, winter making its final calculation about who deserved to see spring. The fox survived. She survived because the alpha's pack hunted successfully, because their kills sustained her, because their territorial dominance kept other predators at bay. She survived, and in surviving, she began to serve a function she did not consciously intend. The ravens who followed wolf packs also followed her now, recognizing that where she went, food might be found. Those ravens sometimes located the pack's kills before the wolves returned, sometimes kept watch over carcasses when grizzlies or other scavengers approached. The ravens became a link between fox and wolves, a communication network that benefited all parties. The fox also served as an early warning system. Her smaller size meant she could hunt in terrain the wolves avoided. Dense underbrush, rocky areas, places where the pack's larger bodies would make noise. When she detected threats, grizzlies, rival packs, human presence, her sudden alertness and flight signaled information the wolves could use. It was not intentional cooperation. It was ecology playing out, the way species find niches and relationships that help them survive. But it looked like something more. To the biologists who would later study this interaction, it looked like the beginning of an interspecies alliance, a cooperation that transcended the normal boundaries of predator and prey. But in this moment, in the deep cold of February, it was simply survival. The fox surviving because the wolves allowed it, the wolves benefiting in small ways from her presence. And the alpha, watching from distances the fox never saw, making continuous calculations about whether this strange arrangement served his pack or threatened it. Then came the night that changed everything. The fox had found a fresh kill just after dark, a young elk the pack had taken that afternoon. She had fed and was caching meat for later when she heard it, the sound of something large moving through the forest with the careless confidence of an apex predator. Grizzly. They were supposed to be in hibernation, but warm spells sometimes roused them, and a particularly large male had been active this winter, terrorizing every pack in the region. The Lamar wolves had lost a yearling to him in December. Other packs had abandoned kills rather than confront him. The bear emerged from the trees, his massive form unmistakable even in darkness. 800 pounds of muscle and hunger and terrible purpose. He had smelled the kill from half a mile away and had come to claim it. The fox should have fled. Everything in her evolution said, run from bears. Bears are death. But she had finally, after weeks of bear survival, managed to cache enough meat to last her several days. That meat represented the difference between life and death in temperatures that were dropping to 40 below. Losing it meant starving, meant her body consuming itself again, meant potentially not surviving until spring. She did not flee. Instead, she stood her ground, all 12 pounds of her, and she barked. It was a sharp, aggressive vocalization, the sound a fox makes when defending territory or warning away threats. Against another fox, it might have worked. Against a grizzly bear, it was like shouting at an avalanche. The bear looked at her, his small eyes showing what might have been amusement or contempt or simply the indifference of something so powerful it need fear nothing. He moved toward the kill, toward her cache, brushing aside her warnings as inconsequential. The fox barked again, her voice high and desperate. She darted forward, nipping at the bear's back leg. Not hard enough to hurt, but enough to annoy, to challenge, to perhaps make him decide the kill was not worth the irritation. The bear swatted at her. It was a lazy swipe, almost playful, the way a cat might bat at a mouse it was not quite ready to kill. But those claws were 5 inches long and backed by muscles that could decapitate elk. If he connected, the fox would die instantly. She dodged, her small size and agility saving her. But she was trapped now, between the bear and the trees, her escape routes limited. The bear took another step toward the kill, and she knew with absolute clarity that she had seconds to live. Then, from the darkness, came a sound that stopped the bear mid-step. The alpha's howl, but different from any vocalization the fox had heard before. Not territorial challenge, not hunting call. This was the war howl, the sound wolves made when defending pack members, when fighting threats to their survival. And behind it, the immediate response of his entire pack, their voices converging in a chorus of aggression and unity. The wolves came fast. The fox saw them emerging from the forest like gray ghosts, spreading out in the tactical formation they used for hunting, but modified for confrontation. The alpha led, but the breeding female was at his shoulder, and the yearlings flanked wide, and the younger wolves filled gaps, creating a wall of coordinated predation. 8 wolves, 800 pounds of grizzly. In most situations, the bear would win. But wolves did not fight as individuals. They fought as a pack, and a pack could bring down prey 10 times the size of a single wolf. The alpha did not hesitate. He went straight at the bear, not attacking, but challenging. His body language saying, "You do not belong here. Leave or fight." The breeding female moved to his right, mirroring his stance. The yearlings completed the formation, and suddenly the bear was facing not individual wolves, but a unified force, coordinated and committed. The grizzly roared. It was a sound designed to terrify, to assert dominance, to make prey flee and predators reconsider. The wolves did not flinch. The standoff lasted perhaps 15 seconds. The bear calculating, the wolves waiting, the fox frozen between them, her small body insignificant in this confrontation of giants. Then the bear made his choice. He turned and walked away, not running, but retreating with the dignity of something that could afford to choose which battles to fight. He had been roused from hibernation hungry, but he was not starving. The kill was not worth injuries from 8 wolves who had just demonstrated they would fight to defend it. The wolves watched him go, maintaining formation until he disappeared into the forest. Only then did they relax, their postures shifting from combat-ready to the loose alertness of predators who had won without bloodshed. The alpha turned to the fox. She remained where she had frozen, her body still locked in the defensive stance she had held against the bear. Her amber eyes met his pale yellow gaze, and in that moment passed a recognition that neither species had language for, but both understood. She had tried to defend the kill, futilely, stupidly, with courage so disproportionate to her size that it transcended into something almost noble. And the alpha had responded by bringing his entire pack to drive off a threat that could have killed them all. He had risked his wolves to protect a fox. It made no strategic sense. It violated the logic of pack survival. But he had done it anyway, and in doing so, he had transformed their relationship from tolerated presence to something that looked, from certain angles, almost like protection. The breeding female approached the fox. The smaller animal tensed, waiting for punishment, for the lesson about overstepping boundaries. But the female wolf simply sniffed her, reading the scent of terror and courage, of bear musk and fresh kill. Then she turned away, her expression unreadable. The pack moved to the kill. They fed, ignoring the fox, who remained frozen in the same spot, processing what had just happened. They fed for perhaps 20 minutes, then began to disperse, heading back to whatever rendezvous site they had been occupying when the alpha's howl summoned them. As the alpha passed the fox on his way to follow his pack, he paused. He looked at her one more time, and in that look was something that might have been acknowledgement or assessment, or perhaps the wolf equivalent of a question. What are you to us? What have you become? Then he was gone, and the fox was alone, with a partially consumed kill, a cache of meat the bear had not touched, and a profound confusion about the rules that governed her world. She did not sleep that night. She remained near the kill, feeding when hunger compelled, but mostly simply existing in a state of heightened alertness, replaying the confrontation in her mind, trying to understand. By dawn, she had reached a conclusion that was less conscious thought than instinctive recognition. Her survival was no longer separate from the pack's survival. She had become entangled with them in ways that went beyond scavenging their kills. The alpha had defended her against a grizzly bear. That act created obligations, created connections, created something that in the human world might be called debt or alliance, but that in the wild was simply the recognition that their fates were bound together. She did not understand why the alpha had made this choice, but she understood that the choice had been made and that it changed everything. Part 3. The Revelation and the Fracture. February gave way to March, and with the calendar shift came subtle changes in the landscape. Days grew infinitesimally longer. Temperatures rose from devastating to merely brutal. The snow, which had seemed permanent, began showing the first microscopic signs of eventual melt. A wetness in direct sunlight, a heaviness that suggested impermanence. The fox had grown comfortable in a way that would have horrified her ancestors. She traveled openly in the Lamar pack's territory now, no longer skulking in shadows. She fed from their kills regularly, sometimes arriving while the pack was still present, maintaining respectful distance but no longer fleeing at first sight of gray fur. The pack had adapted to her presence with varying degrees of acceptance. The alpha showed neither approval nor disapproval, simply acknowledged her existence, as he acknowledged ravens and magpies, scavengers who served a function in the ecosystem. The breeding female remained watchful but no longer hostile, her initial suspicion evolving into pragmatic tolerance. The yearlings had become almost playful around the fox. Twice, the young wolves had approached her with the curiosity of adolescents who had not yet learned all the boundaries of pack behavior. They had not threatened, had simply investigated, sniffing and circling before bounding away. The fox had remained still during these encounters, understanding that young wolves were testing rules, learning limits, and that her survival depended on being boring rather than provocative. It was one of the younger wolves, a male yearling with distinctive white markings on his chest, who changed everything. The yearling had been born the previous spring, one of 5 pups in the breeding female's litter. He was gangly still, caught in the awkward stage between puppy and adult, all legs and ears and uncoordinated enthusiasm. But he was also learning to hunt, learning the pack's complex social dynamics, learning what it meant to be a wolf. On a bright March morning, the yearling encountered the fox near a frozen stream. She was hunting voles, her attention focused on sounds beneath the snow. He was supposed to be with the pack on a morning patrol, but he had wandered off, following rabbit scent, being young and easily distracted. He approached her with friendly curiosity, his tail up, his posture playful rather than threatening. The fox froze, reading his body language, trying to determine if this was danger or simply youthful energy. The yearling play-bowed, front legs extended, rear end up, tail wagging. It was an invitation, a universal canine language that said, "I want to play, not fight." The fox did not know how to respond. She had never played with a wolf. She had barely played with other foxes, her solitary nature and the demands of survival leaving little room for recreation. But something in the yearling's open, friendly stance awakened an instinct she had thought long buried. She took a tentative step toward him. The yearling's tail wagged harder. He bounded backward, then forward, then backward again, his movements exaggerated and clumsy, typical of young predators still mastering their bodies. The fox darted left. The yearling followed, his larger size offset by her agility. She cut right, and he overshot, tumbling in snow, scrambling back to his feet with the graceless enthusiasm of the young. For 10 minutes they played. It was the cautious play of different species learning each other's signals, but it was play nonetheless, running and dodging, gentle nips and exaggerated chases, the kind of interaction that built bonds and understanding. Then the breeding female arrived. She appeared at the tree line, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the scene before her. The yearling playing with the fox. Her pup, her offspring, engaging with an animal that was not pack, not family, not even the same species. The female wolf's growl was low and unmistakable. It froze both fox and yearling, stopped their play mid-motion. The yearling understood immediately. His posture shifted from playful to submissive, his tail tucking, his head lowering. He had overstepped, had violated some boundary he had not known existed. The breeding female stalked forward. Her aggression was not directed at the yearling. He was pack, he was her pup. He would be corrected later in pack language the fox could not interpret. Her aggression was focused entirely on the fox. The smaller animal ran. She bolted for the tree line, for the rocky terrain where her size would be an advantage, for anywhere that was not within range of those jaws. But the breeding female was fast and motivated, driven by protective instinct and perhaps by the accumulated tension of months watching this strange alliance develop between her mate and a creature who had no business in their territory. The chase was brutal and short. The breeding female caught the fox within 50 yards, her jaws closing on the smaller animal's hind leg. The fox screamed, a sound of pain and terror that carried across the frozen landscape. The breeding female shook her head, a predator behavior designed to break bones, to kill prey efficiently. The fox felt something tear in her leg, felt hot pain radiate through her body. She twisted, trying to escape, and the wolf's grip shifted, released. The fox scrambled away on 3 legs, the fourth trailing uselessly. She made it to a rocky outcropping and squeezed into a crevice too small for the wolf to follow. Behind her, the breeding female stood guard, her message clear. You are not pack. You are not welcome. Leave or die. The yearling had watched the entire encounter, confused and distressed. He whined, a sound that asked questions his limited understanding could not formulate. Why? We were playing, I thought. The breeding female turned on her pup. She did not attack, but her body language was harsh, corrective. She was teaching him a lesson about boundaries, about the difference between pack and outsider, about the rules that governed wolf society. From the crevice, the fox listened to their communication, growls and whines, postures and responses. She understood none of the specifics, but she understood the core message. She had become too comfortable, too familiar, and the breeding female had just re-established the natural order. Her leg throbbed with pain that went beyond simple injury. She could feel the wrongness in it, the damage that was more than torn skin. She tried to put weight on it and nearly collapsed from the radiating agony. The breeding female and yearling eventually left, their forms disappearing into the forest. But the female's scent remained strong around the rocky outcropping, a warning that would keep the fox trapped for hours. As morning shifted to afternoon, the fox's situation became critical. She was injured, hidden in a crevice that offered protection but no food or water. The temperature was dropping. She could feel shock setting in, her body's response to trauma and pain. She needed help. But she was a solitary animal, and solitary animals did not call for help. They either survived through their own strength or they died. As dusk approached, she heard movement outside her shelter. She tensed, expecting the breeding female to return to finish what she had started. But the scent that drifted into the crevice was different. The alpha. He approached the outcropping slowly, his movements deliberate. He did not try to enter the crevice. His larger body would not fit. Instead, he laid down outside the opening, his position blocking the wind, his bulk providing a windbreak that immediately made the temperature in the crevice more bearable. The fox did not move. She simply watched his form silhouette against the failing light, trying to understand this newest development in a relationship that defied every pattern she had ever known. The alpha remained there through the night. The temperature dropped to 30 below. The wind picked up, driving snow into horizontal sheets. Inside the crevice, the fox shivered but survived, protected from the worst of the cold by rock walls and by the wolf's bulk blocking the opening. She did not understand why he was there. She could not know that the alpha had smelled blood when he returned from a hunt, had tracked the scent to this outcropping, had read in scent and sign what had happened. She could not know that he was facing a choice between his mate's protective instinct and something else, a recognition that the fox's presence had become part of the pack's ecosystem in ways that might benefit them all. Or perhaps his choice was simpler. Perhaps he simply recognized that he had extended protection to this animal repeatedly, and withdrawing that protection now, when she was injured and vulnerable, would be a betrayal of something he had not consciously chosen, but had nonetheless created. Dawn came cold and clear. The alpha rose and left, his departure as silent as his arrival. The fox remained in the crevice, her legs swollen to twice its normal size, her body weak from pain and shock. She needed to move, to find water, to find food. But putting weight on her leg sent such waves of pain through her system that she nearly vomited. The injury was severe enough that infection was likely, and infection in winter meant death. She spent the day drifting in and out of consciousness, her body's defense against overwhelming pain. She did not hear the Alpha return that evening, did not smell the rabbit he left at the crevice entrance. She only knew when she woke to darkness again that food was there, fresh killed, warm enough to still have some heat, placed precisely where she could reach it without leaving her shelter. She dragged the rabbit into the crevice and fed, her body's demand for calories overriding the pain. The meat helped, not enough to heal her, but enough to give her body resources to fight the injury. For 3 days, this pattern continued. The Alpha brought food, rabbits, a portion of an elk kill, once a grouse he must have spent hours hunting. He never stayed long, never entered the crevice, simply delivered the food and departed.